All right, we forgot to record last time, so let's just do a quick review so it gets into the recording of what we did talk about. We talked about how semicolons in Swift are optional. Here's a command that doesn't have a semicolon. Here's one that does. Got an extra window open here. I'll show you what it's for in just a second. Right, so we talked about the requirement of semicolon. The only time you really need it is if you have two commands on the same line, and I'm not a big fan of that in the first place, so you shouldn't need a lot. But if you have two commands on the same line, they have to be separated with a semicolon. You still don't have to put one on the end. Then we talked about inserting special characters in your command. You can put any Unicode character in your variable names or your strings that you want to. In this case, I have a variable name that looks like the user's icon. To insert those, you either use an Alt key with the numeric keypad, entering in the 4-digit hexadecimal Unicode character, which most people don't know, or you use the menu, and I don't know if this is going to exactly hit the recording, but it'll probably pop down into it. I use the menu Edit, Special Characters, and then the special characters show up in a list here, and I can add them. They're not showing up right now, I think, because of where my cursor is. So, oh, there's the special characters. And I had it highlighted. Do that one more time. Insert special characters. If you do this a lot, why aren't they showing up this time? Because I'm in the middle.
I think it's because we're in the front.
Now I've locked it up. Dang it. One more time if this doesn't work. There's the one I've used before, so that's handy. There we go. There's all this happy faces and flowers and animals, and that might be where our pile of poop is, who knows. But anyways, you can get the idea, and there's other ones here. You just keep going. Special characters, Mac characters. Those might come in handy. All kinds of things you can do. Not a real powerful tool, though, if you are a foreign language programmer, which none of you are, then it might come in handy to be able to write things in your own language. Then we kind of got sidetracked with for loops. Right? We also created a few errors. When you create an error, you get a red marker. If you click the red marker, it'll tell you what's wrong. About as good as any other programming language. Sometimes it's pretty cryptic. There's just something wrong syntactically. Right? And when this is wrong, the rest of this is no longer reprocessed. So you have to correct the errors or remove things or move them around in the right order. And we also discovered when you write loops, this is a loop, we'll talk about that in a second. You write loops if you want to see the results of the loop instead of how many times it's going to execute. Click this little dot, it opens a new window pane, and then you can see the output of the loop or the entire output of your program if you wish to call it that. Since we're on the topics of loops, if you put 3 dots there, it gives you 1 to 5 and it executes 5 times. If you put a less than there instead, it gives you 1 to 4 times through the loop and it only executes 4 times. You can also use a for loop to walk through a string, 1 character at a time. This is just a variable name. In that string, walk through it, executes 13 times, and each character gets printed on its own line because print line is the output command, right? And the line means print this on a line by itself, start a new line when you're done. There's also simply print, it means print this, but don't start a new line because I might want to tack some more stuff on the end of it. What else did we talk about? That's about it, right? So we don't need semicolons. What other good stuff have we got? Oh, we talked about constants. The constants start with, this is a constant, starts with the word let. Variables start with the word var, and those are required. Unless you're creating a temporary variable, this variable I is only accessible inside that loop. So if I try another print line here of I get a syntax error going, never heard of it. What do you mean? It's right there. No, that's loop context variable. If you want that I variable to be available outside of the loop, then you have to declare it as a variable above the loop and then use it inside the loop. It's pretty rare that you need that, though.
You need curly braces for the loops.
Yes, that's the other thing we talked about. In C#, if it's a one-line loop, you can leave the curly brackets out. Okay, that's acceptable in C#, assuming you put parentheses and semicolons and all the other C# things in there. In C# and JavaScript and PHP, if your loop only has one command in it, you don't need the curly brackets. Not true in Swift. In Swift, you need to put them in there every single time you have a block of code. Good. How about comments? First kind of comment is a single line or inline comment, // It can go at the end of a line. And the other kind of comment most of you dug out already when you were looking through the notes the other day is /*. But there's something special in Swift about the block comment that isn't true in any other language that I know.
Nestable?
You can nest them inside. In other languages, you can't do this. In C# you can. C#. I'm not in C#. That's not for a couple hours yet. We're in Swift. In Swift, you can do that. It's a comment inside the other one. The reason you can't do it in other languages is that the other compilers simply look for this character code, so that's the end of the comment. And then it sees this one and goes, what's that there for? In other languages, not in Swift. And this is extra cool because when you comment out code, did a lot of that last year, right? Why doesn't this work? And you're gonna do it even a whole lot more in JavaScript and PHP. Maybe not so much in Swift. But when you block out code or comment it out, because I want to see what's causing the problem. If I comment this out and it has comments embedded inside it, then it doesn't work. In Swift, it does. So that's pretty cool. Might not need it a lot, but when you start commenting out code, then that'll come in handy.
Can define the type of variable if you want to.
How?
Colon after the variable name.
Okay, so here's my string variable. If I want to define that as a string, I can do that. The book recommends most of the time, don't bother.
What's the point? I mean, it types it as a string. Seems like it types it strongly as a string as well.
It does.
What's the
Well, let's pause on that in case it didn't hit the recording. Adam said it types it strongly as a string. Without Adam answering, what does that mean?
It can't be used in math
Okay,
because it's not a number.
that's fine. That's not what it means. He said it for the recording, you can't use it in math, but that's pretty common. When he said it's strongly typed as a string, what that means is you can't come down here later and say string str equals 56. Even though, okay, here it's defined as a string, even if I leave that out, okay? String str, that variable, is a string because I put a string in it. You can't change it to a different type later. I think I mentioned to you that yesterday, or Monday, that other languages let you do that. JavaScript, I think, lets you do that. PHP definitely lets you do that. You declare a variable, it sets its type to string, and then later on you put a 56 in it, it goes fine, now it's 56. Not in Swift. In Swift, once you put a value of a certain type in a variable, that's the variable's type. Forever. Until it goes away. So this isn't legal if we touch the error. It says type string does not conform to, and if I make a little room here, we can see the rest of it, an integer literal. I can't put an integer in a string. That's what that's saying. I can change it to something else. As long as it's a string, it's cool.
Would that mostly be useful for defining a specific type of number? If you wanted. I mean,
But even the only exception to this rule is if you define a number as a double, for instance. So let's clean up some mess here. Probably should leave those and save it. Okay, so let's put it at the top. If I declare a variable price equals 275, what type is that?
Double.
Or double.
It's a double.
Or float? Can't be both. Which one is it?
It's a double.
He says it's a double, he's right. Why? Because later on in the book it says whenever you type in decimal numbers as literals, they are treated as doubles. You might remember when I taught you programming logic beginning, there are different kinds of doubles, there are different kinds of integers, and I said always use int, always use double, because they're the most transportable. This book actually says that. It's the most transportable, it's the most easy to modify, because if I could do this, and why would you define it as a float? Because I want it to be a float. Then I have to declare it as a float. Right? That's legal. And it doesn't change the value, though, if I try to put something like this in there. Notice the value out here. It's not exact. It's got some extra fluff out there. That's the problem with floats. They're not quite as exact. All right. So why would you want to manually declare? Because of this, and I think that's what you were alluding to, Adam, that if you want to use a type that's not natural, if I say 3.14 without this, that's a double. If I want it to be a float, I have to declare it as a float. You have to. All right. Brittany, give me just one more second. If I do whole numbers, I get int. Reading the book, there's all kinds of ints. There's unsigned ints, there's u8, uint8, u8, 16, 32, 64. All of them, the book says, use int. Because when you type a literal, that's an int. It's not an unsigned int, it's an int. Why would you want to use all these flaky types?
Compatibility with a database?
Because?
Compatibility with an existing
Compatibility with a database, maybe.
Less memory usage.
Assembler, what?
Less memory usage.
Less memory usage, yeah. If I declare this as a UI8, or uint8, or whatever it is, I forget the syntax, I never do it. If I declare it as it's 1 byte versus a regular integer. How big is an integer?
Depends
4
on-
bytes.
and it's
32 or
depends on your
64.
In Swift, it depends on the machine you're on. Okay? If you're on a 32-bit machine, it's a 32-bit integer. If your program is running in a 32-bit machine, which is probably an iPhone and an iPad, I bet they're not 64-bit machines, I'm not sure. But the size of the integer adjusts, which could be dangerous, right? If you're putting big, huge numbers in there and then you try to run it on an iPhone where it's 32-bit, it might not work.
Want to make sure it's 64-bit. You'd have to define that.
You'd have to define it as a 64-bit integer. Okay. The book says most of the time you're fine. If you're trying to save memory because you're writing this big, huge monster app and you want to make it as memory efficient as possible, then you can use the other types. For our purposes, we're going to use int and double just because it makes life a lot easier. Brittany?
By the way, I think when you go into preferences in general, there's an option to continue building after errors.
Oh, okay. So in the Xcode preferences?
Preferences,
Okay.
and then in general, just the continue building. I'm assuming that means it'll run.
I don't know if that'll work in the playground. If that's just a playground thing, it might be. It would definitely be dangerous in the future because basically what it's saying is if you find an error, keep going and run the program anyways. And I wouldn't recommend that. Just be careful. Okay, so this is an integer. Age is an integer because I put a 56 in it. Another reason you might want to declare a variable with a type is if you want to declare the variable and not initialize it immediately. Notice the error, not good enough. You either tell me its type or you give me a number so I can figure it out. It's basically what that error is going to say. Type annotation missing in the pattern. It's like the computer wrote these error messages, right? Why can't humans write error messages that we can understand? Hey, dummy, give me a type or give me a number. So if I want this to be an integer, it's a capital int, by the way. I think it was in the other languages. And there, if on the list, it showed us all the other types of integers, int 16, int 32, int 64, int 8, etc. And then there's the U versions of all of those that don't even show up here because I don't have a U at the beginning. U means unsigned, no negative numbers. And the book talks a little bit about those, but it doesn't go into it very much because it recommends using double and int.
What about, I just remembered this kind of vaguely from logic beginning, doing math with doubles and ints, and how does that work?
How does that work? How did it work in C sharp?
Yeah,
Promoted
because-
into
You have
the
to cast.
largest type.
Good. Again, for the recording, in C sharp, if I do this, come on, your keys are over here. If I do that in C sharp, this is a double, this is an integer. C sharp temporarily promotes this to a double, does the math, and the answer is a double. Not here. Now, why that says UI int 8? No idea. Oh, because I haven't put anything in it yet. Okay, can't do it. You cannot do mixed type math at all. What a pain. This one to me is a pain. And if you can find a way around it, I'd love to see it. But what you have to do here is either convert this to a double, and you can typecast it pretty much the same way we did in C sharp. And now it's happy.
The parentheses are just backwards.
Pardon me?
In Swift, you put parentheses around the.
No, in Swift you put them here, and in C sharp the parenthesis went around the type. Yes. So the syntax is a little different. This makes more sense to me. Convert that to a double. I could have converted price to an int, but when you do that, it lops off the decimal places temporarily and does the math. So in this case, 15 times 3.14 would have been about 45. Does not round. I tested it. Okay. So to me, that's a pain. I like the way C sharp does it a lot better. I understand this, that from a syntax perspective, doing mixed type math is dangerous, but it's not usually. Multiplying an integer by a double shouldn't be a problem. But they don't let you do it. Notice I made this let. That means I've calculated the total. I'm never going to calculate it again. It's a constant. Naturally, I don't do that. Constants are values that I expect to be using in lots of different places whose values don't change while the program is executing. In Swift, it seems to be use let whenever you're creating a variable whose value after this will never change. I'm going to try to use that. If there's an advantage to it, I'm not sure what it is, but we'll see.
Is there any standards for this, like in last class, any constant had to be all caps? Is there any?
No, that was a standard. First of all, it's not a rule. Okay, it's not a syntax rule. You can, a number of you did, or maybe it was the networkers, right? Name their constants lowercase or camelback. I would use the same standards that you're used to. Got a couple of interns. What are the standards for naming variables at Skyward?
Variables are all camel case.
Okay.
I believe constants are Pascal case. So.
Or what case?
Pascal case. I think that's the first letter is capitalized,
Okay.
and then so is the.
So kind of like title case, where every word is capitalized. For the recording at Skyward, it's pretty much the same as mine. Except constants are not all caps, they are title case. Title case is what I use for function names. Some people use camelback for function names. Class names are usually title case. Sentry, any different?
It's weird. I don't know that there is a standard.
Okay. That would be disconcerting, wouldn't
Or at least there wasn't.
it?
I mean, there are some standards because the HTML has hard-coded standards.
Yes.
Variables are all lowercase. And that affects things a lot because a
Yep.
lot of variables are just all lowercase because we're working mostly.
That's because you're working in JavaScript or HTML, right? Okay. So, let's just stick with our same standards. All I'll ask you to do is be consistent within a program. So if in one program you create 6, and I don't know about these lets here. I would say make real constants the way we've defined them in the past, where this is I'm taking a literal and converting it to a constant. I would make those all uppercase. These, a variable like total that's never going to change, but I'm using a let because Swift suggests it anyways, I probably will leave it Camelback. It's new for me, so we'll see how it goes. If it comes back to bite me sometime, I'll change my standards. Good question. Jen?
One thing that is different is your types do have to be capitalized in Swift.
It's not different in C#. The lowercase double is a primitive built-in type. So lowercase double is built into the language versus capital D double, which also exists in C#, is a class that contains double values and manipulates them. It's a little bit different. Right? It is available there. There are no primitive types here. Everything in Swift is a class. And you can dot notate the doubles and do things to them, and everything's a class. It's one of the first languages. I'd have to check, but I think it's one of the first languages that doesn't have any primitives in it at all. What other types do I have? Besides those UI, all those integer types that are out there. What else? We saw float is available. What else?
Boolean.
There's a Boolean type. Okay, and what are the constants?
False, right?
So I could create a variable called is married, bool. It's not bool. Well, it looks like it's not Boolean, it's bool. Okay, and that's fine. Or I can simply say equals true. Or false, and I don't think we can capitalize those. I'm typing capital letters and it's making them lowercase for me. Wow. I held the shift key down when I was typing that and it didn't even think about it. That's pretty cool. Okay. Now, in the other hour, somebody mentioned that you can't do this. I think equals is okay, but we can't do this. You lied to me.
Maybe was it just the plus equals then?
Yeah.
No, you're doing plus equals.
Oh, if you put those here? Okay, so if I wanted to do after this, let's put that back to the star. But this would be interesting. Total is now a double, right? Total is a double. Now I'm going to change it, so I had to change it to a var so I can mess with it. Is that legal? How can that be legal? That's an integer. I just added it to a double. I just found my first inconsistency in this language. I can't do mixed type math. That's what that is. It's mixed type math. This is it. Let's try it the other way. That's legal. Okay. What do you know? What do you see? What's different?
It's not a variable.
It's not a variable. It's a literal. You can do mixed math with literals, but you can't do mixed math with variables or constants.
So it promotes the literal.
Yeah. So watch if I do this now. If I say count equals 1, and then put count here, you better not let me do it. That's better. Okay, we verified it.
Now I can do plus equals count.
I doubt it. But good idea. Let's check. Plus equals, oops. Doesn't like that either. And double is not identical to uint8. That uint8 bothers me. I didn't say it was, this is supposed to be an integer. Why wouldn't it be an int32?
Well, you're using count.
Yeah. Oh, and that's stuck. But this one's a variable. It said they had the same problem with that one. It said UI8. I don't know if the error message is wrong or what's going on there.
Unless because you're assigning count to a constant and it it's only one, it's
Say let
inside
count
U
equals
and T.
minus one.
Doing that automatically for you.
What if you do -1 from 0?
Then it would be fine,
Yeah.
because then it's double and double. I'm still getting the same error message here.
Yeah.
So that's kind of bizarre because it's definitely not a uint8, so their error message is a little generic here. And Justin's already complained about how cryptic they can be, and now not only that, they're misleading.
Well, I guess it is in beta too, though. So
It is in beta, so we'll give them a break. They hopefully won't be listening to my recordings on YouTube, and they won't come after me for being so crusty or so mean when they're still in beta.
Apparently, if you also have an integer variable and then try to add a literal double, it works. But it doesn't,
A literal, again, it's when you're mixing with literals, it figures something out, but what does it create when you do that? That's a good question. So here's what Nick was talking about. All right, he's creating
but it does run.
total equals, no, be careful because total's already a double. So let's do a new variable called integer total that is equal to the quantity, which should be a double, times 1.5. Legal, but I'm getting an answer of 15, so
It is truncating the
Oof.
double.
that's nasty.
It does work with that.
Wait a minute, I'm still not done testing. Wow.
Your quantity is an int.
Yeah, I know, but look what it did. I multiplied my int by 1.5, and if you did that in C# or JavaScript or PHP or any of those other languages, you would expect the answer to be 1.5 of 15, not 15.
So it made it an integer because that's the first it came across.
No, that's the variable that came across.
What if,
Is
Your
my
variable.
because I have my 1.5 in the front.
I bet that's gonna change.
What if you typecast quantity as a double?
That'll work. I don't have any doubts. That'll work. I can demonstrate it. But that's kind of scary. What we're used to and what seasoned programmers are used to is I multiply times 1.5 and I get a double. Here I get an integer.
That was multiplication sign. There we go.
Okay, I figured that would work because now it's double times double. But what was interesting is double constant times integer variable is integer. That's scary. What Adam said is maybe it'll change. Okay, but to me, this is very high on Volker's list in my notes. I'm still on page 2. How do I do calculations? What are the types? Page 2 in my notes, and this mixed math stuff is kind of scary.
It'd be easy to screw yourself up.
I think that'd be very easy.
Yeah.
Mhm. But that's where the playground comes in handy because when I didn't have the double on there, it said 15, and then I go, oh, that's right. I'm in Swift, and Swift doesn't like to do that stuff. And so then I typecast it. Yes, sir.
Yeah, going back to the ints, do you think in Swift, because you only put in a 15, they decide that it would go down to the lowest level to conserve memory, like automatically?
So that's why I said put in minus.
Well, it said int 8. It said unsigned int 8,
Okay.
right? And later on, here, look. Well, that's count, though. What if I did it in
Count
quantity?
was an unsigned int also though.
Yeah, at least that's what the error message said. But what if I did this now? Quantity equals minus 10. Close enough. The error, it's not that it's an integer. I don't think it's an int 8 or uint 8. I think the error message is telling me it's a uint 8, but it's not really. And the same thing, what if a uint 8, that means it's an unsigned integer with 8 bits. That's 1 byte.
Make it equal.
What's the maximum value of an 8-bit number? 255 if it's unsigned. If it's signed, the maximum value is plus or minus 128. Right? So the maximum value, just if you do all the binary math, the maximum value is 255. So if this was really a U8, I couldn't do this. It's letting me do it. So it's the error message that's messed up there. And I'm sure beta 6 and 7 and 8 will come out, and then we'll finally get our version in October, and we'll look at some of that stuff.
So it's probably actually just an int, it's not an.
It's an int.
Yeah,
Otherwise
so
it wouldn't
it's
let me do that.
32 was asking for.
It's definitely not unsigned. That was the first clue. And then the fact that I'm putting 300 in it tells me it's not an int 8. It's really an int, and the int type, as we said before, is dependent. Its size is dependent on the operating system that you're using. Right? And so, but even a 32-bit int maximum value is 80 gazillion something, and we could test it, but I'm sure we could do. I wonder if I can do this. I don't know if it's parentheses. There's a min in there someplace.
What is it that meant to do?
Tells you the minimum value of that type, supposedly, but it might be int type instead of, maybe you can't do it on a variable. Okay.
You have to do it on the type.
Yep. Okay. The only other thing I have in my notes, I think we'll stop here for types, is there is a, where did I put that? An optionals type. You might remember in Programming Logic Intermediate, we started using nullable variable types, the question marks in them. Same thing is available here. However, the book, when it talks about optionals,
We have two ways to,
but it lies, just so you know. I tested it, didn't work.
so you have to type in optional.
No. Okay, here's the optionals. Just says it's possible that the variable has nothing in it at all. The example they show you is, okay, here's a string. I'm going to try to convert it to an integer. What if that fails? What's in converted number? In all other languages, it's nil because we never initialized it. It's nil. But if you make this an optional variable and you have to then typecast it or define its type as an int question mark, it can store nothing. Okay? And so then if you do the toInt, possible number toInt, and this fails because that has Volcker in it, this will have nothing in it. But where the notes are wrong, or the book seems to be wrong because I can't make it work, is using if statements to see, is there anything in there? Okay. Oh, wait a minute. I misread it. Or is this, that might be the old stuff. Nope, I misread it. I didn't see the not equal to nil. It probably works. Why do I have to ask if it's not equal to nil? I thought I could just say if converted number. So if you want a variable to store nothing, then you have to make it nullable. It's pretty much what we had to do in C#.
Make it null.
Except it's nil instead of null.
It's nil, but that's not uncommon. Nil and null are interchangeable in some languages. Go ahead.
You do that by just putting a question mark after the cast.
That's not even a cast. You're defining its type. You're defining its type. This statement here is illegal if there isn't if this is not a optional variable.
Why didn't you just be like var server response code question mark?
If you set it equal to nil when you initialized it, it would probably be nullable. It'd have to be. So but that's not what's in there. If I try to use a variable, we saw it in the recording earlier, if I try to use a variable before I assign it a value, I get a syntax error. Okay? So if you want a variable to have no value, but have it exist but with no value and be able to use it, you can assign it a value nil, which makes it then an optional variable, what we used to call a nullable variable in C#.
You can't say it equals nil unless you have a typecast that is nullable.
Take your word for it, but I'm gonna test it anyway. I don't take anybody's word for it. Variable age equals nil.
You gotta- but
Okay,
now it
doesn't work.
know what it does.
That doesn't work unless I do this.
Nope, doesn't work either.
It won't do that either, huh?
Oh, no, take the question mark off.
Well, I know that. But I thought it would automatically typecast it as a nullable variable
Well, what
if
type of
I-
variable?
if I just assigned it nil.
But now it doesn't know if it's an int, a string,
It would be
or
null.
whatever.
True, good point. Why wouldn't it do that? Because it wouldn't know if it was an integer variable or a string nil or a double nil or what kind of nil is it?
Until you stuff something in it.
Until you stuff something in it, but it won't, it syntactically choked on it here because it didn't know what type of variable it was supposed to be. John?
I'm backtracking a little bit.
Okay.
But, back up to your I total there. I was playing around with that, and if you put the integer first,
Mm-hmm.
it works.
No, that's where I started.
I did,
You mean the integer is a literal or the integer variable
like,
first?
well, I got rid of the variable, and if
Well,
you
that's
just-
different.
No, but if you do a double times an integer, it does that.
You mean literals?
Yes. that's
3
what it
times
was.
1.5.
Well, I did 15 times 3.
Nobody writes code that does that, unfortunately. No, really, nobody does math that multiplies a literal by a literal because the answer is always 4.5. Why would I want to calculate it? Okay, so yeah, okay, maybe it does. But you're never going to write a line of code that says that except in programming logic beginning, which you're well past.
I just thought it was interesting.
Yeah, well,
When you
yeah,
flip them,
again,
it does different
but that's not
things.
quite as bad because it wouldn't cause some issues. Okay, so those are optional variables. I think I haven't used any optional ones in iOS yet, but the book gives an example. If you try to convert a number into a string or a string into a number and it fails, you probably want to have a nullable variable there so that you can deal with it. But the part that I missed when I was testing this is if you're checking to see, what I would love to be able to do in these languages is just say, if converted number. If there's something in there, let me do it. Okay. But I got syntax errors and I missed this. You still have to check to see if it's not equal to nil, meaning it has something in it.
I was looking at that later on. The if statements have to return true or false.
Yes.
If they're not. If it's
And they
false,
can't return nil, and that's why it chokes. But here's one last thing. We're well out of time, but I appreciate your enthusiasm. Bring it with you next week with more. Some of you said I didn't get as far as some of you did. That's great. Some of you didn't get as far as I did. That's fine too. Just keep plugging along. Because this is how you're going to learn your next language. And the next language after you get out of here, by reading a book, by reading notes, and by having this kind of an outline, and here's the stuff I got to know just to get started. It's a great place to start. Right. But anyway, one last thing on this. Notice the exclamation mark? What Swift recommends is once you have verified that it is not nil with the if statement, I think you have to put the exclamation mark in there. Because if you have a nullable variable, it was the same thing in C#. If it's a nullable variable, you can't just say, give me the number. You had to say nullable variable dot value. You remember that? Same thing here, except you don't use a dot value, use the exclamation mark. This says, give me the number inside. I think this is called forced unwrapping. It's in a class. Unwrap it, give me the number. It's a shortcut for dot value type of thing. Brittany?
No, the parentheses are required.
Yeah, they can't
Okay,
really
I see.
either.
Well, the parentheses are required there for another stupid reason that we'll talk about later.
Okay.
Because it's embedded inside of a string. I think that's amazingly painful. But it's, wait till you see PHP, it's even better. All right, but that's a variable that's embedded inside of a string, literal. Here's the beginning, there's the end.
So is the exclamation mark at the end of the converted number, because I can't see it?
Yes,
Yes.
Yes.
and I don't have a quick way of zooming in here with the book program. Oh, there it is. Or maybe it's control scroll or
It's the one
commands.
over.
That's all right. Yes, it's converted number exclamation mark. It's the same thing we did last year when we did nullable variable dot value. This is a nullable variable. Give me the number out of it. And if you try to do that when it's nil, it crashes. Same thing here. If you do variable exclamation mark and it's nil and you try to use it, it crashes. So that's just a shortcut way of doing it. Again, I consider this kind of an advanced topic. If we end up using nullable variables in this class, I'll be surprised. Okay, if you're trying to keep up with us in class, we're on page 78 in the book, though I have moved ahead a little bit. I don't know if we covered all these topics. I think we got pretty close though.
Arrays.
We didn't talk about tuples. I'm afraid to. Everybody I've talked to about these tuples. What's a tuple? It's a temporary class that lets you put more than one value in a variable and then you dot them out and then it's done. So it's kind of a temporary class without methods, without members, without properties. It's a thing that's got multiple values in it. It's really bizarre.
But that's a function, return multiple things.
Yeah,
That's where it's gonna.
that's kind of nice, but what's wrong with pass by reference? I don't know. So that's the end of the recording. We'll pick up with all this again on Monday.